Okay, we pray that we've come to worship the Lord, be fed from His Word. I'd like to turn to the book of Matthew, chapter 17. Book of Matthew, chapter 17. We'll read the first 13 verses. And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them, that is, Peter, James, and John. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias, talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, one for Elias. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. And Jesus came and touched them, and said, Arise, and be not afraid. When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man, save Jesus only. And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, Tell the vision to no man, until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then say the scribes that Elias must first come? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. This, of course, is Matthew's account of what is commonly known as the Transfiguration of Christ, which was simply a change in the form or the appearance of Christ, not a change in who and what he was, but simply a change in his appearance. In fact, in reality, it is a revealing of who and what Christ is. And this was something that was witnessed by Peter, by James, by John, would been recorded by Matthew, Mark, and Luke as it was told them of Peter, James, and John. And again, it's just Christ revealing his glory to these 3 individuals. It's something that literally happened, something that these 3 men personally experienced. So it was a real personal experience in their lives. It was certainly something very remarkable, very extraordinary, something very momentous. It was something, a lot of people say, well, what does it mean to us? Well, it means a lot. You and I cannot experience in full what Peter and John experienced that day. But all things are written for our learning, and we see what is here is very instructive to you and I, and it is very applicable to our lives. And we want to develop the thought of the message around verses 1 and verse 9. In verse 1, notice Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, bringeth them up into a high mountain apart. Now in those words, notice up and apart. Now Mark records in his account, in Mark chapter 9, verse 2, Jesus taketh with him Peter and James and John, and leadeth them up into a high mountain apart by themselves. So again, notice up and apart. And then Luke, in his account, in Luke chapter 9, verse 28, he took Peter and James and went up into a mountain to pray. That was one of the reasons he went up to the mountain, was to pray. It was not, of course, the only reason. So we see Peter, James, and John apart with Jesus Christ, here in Matthew 17, verse 1. And then in verse 9 of Matthew 17, and they, Peter, James, John, and Christ, come down from the mountain. And then in Mark chapter 9, verse 9, and they came down from the mountain. Luke's account, Luke 9, verse 37, and it came to pass on the next day when they were come down. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record that when they came down, they were immediately, Mark gives the most detailed account, but they were immediately faced with the trials, the distresses, the difficulties, the obstacles of everyday life. You see, immediately they are face to face with a demon-possessed son, and the multitude is questioning the apostles. So we see Peter, James, and John with Jesus. When they come down, they are with Jesus in the everyday experiences of life. So you put these two together, verse 1, verse 9, and we see they are with Jesus apart from everyday life. And then in verse 9, they are with Jesus in everyday life. And those two things are absolutely essential to the Christian life. So we want to speak tonight on with Christ apart and in everyday life. Now we read here in Matthew 17, verse 1, and after 6 days. So we got to give a little bit of background. Something happened 6 days prior to this. Something happened 6 days prior to the transfiguration of Christ. And what that was is recorded in Matthew 16, verses 13 through 28. And what you have there is Jesus arriving in the pagan city of Caesarea Philippi. And at that time, he, for the first time, revealed to the apostles that he would suffer, that he would die, that he would rise again. And he also speaks of his compulsion to do these things, to lay down his life and to rise. Jesus also instructs them, because these are going to be troubling days for the apostles. He instructs them that it is their duty to deny themselves, to take up his cross, and to follow him. And after 6 days, we see our text. So for 6 days, I'm sure that the apostles reflected upon, gave much thought to what Jesus had just shown them, that he was going to lay down his life, that he was going to suffer, he was going to lay down his life, he was going to rise again. And they were greatly puzzled by this. This was not in their plans. In fact, Peter on that occasion said, "Be it far from thee, Lord." So this was not in their plans. And so for 6 days, I'm sure they discussed what Jesus had shown them. So for 6 days, the apostles are trying to fit into their doctrine, fit into their life, what Christ has told them. And no doubt these were 6 days of struggle. My point is that they stood in need of something from God. They stood in need from something from the Lord. They stood in need of something to hold on to. And perhaps even more importantly, they stood in need of something to really get a hold of them. And that brings us to our text. And just like they, we need something from above every day. Every day we need something from above to hold on to. Every day we need something from above that will get a hold of us. And for 6 days, these apostles are in great need. And then we come to our text, which we see they're with Christ on top of the mountain. There are several things we want to notice about this. First of all, this was a special place. It was a very special place. Notice verse 1 again. Jesus taketh. You don't take by accident. He did this on purpose and with a purpose. He taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them, Peter, James, and John, up into a high mountain apart. Mark 9, verse 2, Jesus taketh. Notice the verbs. Bringeth, Jesus taketh with him. With him. Peter, James, and John, and leadeth them up into a high mountain apart. And then in Luke's account, it came to pass about 8 days after these things. So immediately people say, oh, there's a contradiction. Matthew says 6 days, Luke says 8 days. Well, Luke is counting the day that Jesus arrived in Philippi, and he's counting this day of transfiguration, and obviously Matthew did not count those 2 days. But it's no big issue, and that's not our point for the message tonight. But from these accounts, we see this. Jesus taketh, bringeth, leadeth. Taketh, bringeth, leadeth. Peter, James, and John up and apart. This was deliberate, and it was with a definite purpose in mind for Peter, James, and John. So the fact that Jesus taketh, bringeth, and leadeth Peter, James, and John, what that means is that they were under his guiding influence. And being under his guiding influence resulted in them being apart with Jesus. Being under his guiding influence led them to a very special place, apart with Jesus. There is no better place to be than apart with Jesus. And in that time, wonderful and extraordinary things happened. Apart with Jesus, wonderful things will happen. Apart with Jesus, extraordinary things will happen. We need to begin our day under his guiding influence. You don't pick it up midday. You need to begin the day under his guiding influence, which will lead you to be apart with him. Apart from everyday life with him. That's how we need to begin our day. That's how we're going to serve the Lord. So there they are, under the guiding influence of Christ. They are apart from everyday life with Jesus Christ. And it was at this time the transfiguration happens. We read in Luke's account that Jesus went up into the mountain to pray. And again, he brought Peter and James and John. And as Jesus was praying, Luke records in Luke 9, verse 32, that Peter and they that were with him, James and John, were heavy with sleep. They were heavy with sleep. And it was while Jesus was praying that he was transfigured. Notice in Luke chapter 9, verse 29, and as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered. And it was during that time that Moses, the giver of the law, and Elijah, the greatest of the prophets, appeared and talked with Christ. We see that in Luke 9, verses 30 and 31. Keep in mind, while all that was going on, Peter, James, and John are heavy with sleep. Then we see the experience. Again, they are apart with Jesus. And now we see the experience that they had apart with Jesus. And this is a valuable spiritual lesson for you and I that we need to experience every single day. Every single day. So we want to notice several things here. They're asleep, but there was an awakening. Sometime while Moses and Elijah were talking with Christ, and Christ's face was altered, Peter, James, and John awoke. Notice in Luke 9, verse 32, but Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they were awake. So they've been awakened. Apart with Jesus, they are awakened. That means they were stirred from slumber. They were aroused, they became conscious. Every day, we need to get apart with Jesus until we are stirred, until we are aroused by such. We cannot afford to go into the world in a state of slumber, in a state of spiritual slumber. We have to go out into everyday life stirred and aroused by our time apart with Jesus. So they're awakened. Being awakened, they personally saw. They are awake and they see Jesus. But he's not the same as he was before. Notice in Luke chapter 9, verse 32. Luke 9, verse 32. But Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they were awake, they saw his glory. And the two men, Moses and Elijah, that stood with him. They saw his glory. Apart with Jesus, their eyes are opened. And they see the magnificence, they see the splendor, they see the majesty, they see the beauty, they see the elegance of his person. His glory is who he is. They see his glory. Matthew and Mark both record that he was transfigured before them. So in actuality, this transfiguration, it's not a change into something new, but it's an uncovering. It's a revealing of who he was. They saw his glory. In other words, he became on the outside what he was on the inside. How this took place is explained. There was an alteration of his face. We see that in Luke 9, verse 29. Matthew describes this alteration. In Matthew 17, verse 2, it says, his face did shine as the sun. So the magnificence, the majesty, the splendor of God shone through his face. In other words, his face lit up with his own inner glory. Matthew says his raiment was white as the light. And notice Mark, in Mark chapter 9, verse 3, and his raiment became shining, exceeding white as snow, so as no fuller on earth can white them. That is, it's as white can be, his garment. And then we see that in Luke 9:29, the rays of his magnificence, his splendor, his majesty burst through his clothes. Notice in Luke chapter 9, verse 29 again. And as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glistering. It burst, his glory, his beauty burst through his clothes. In addition to this, Matthew 17:3, Peter, James, and John saw Moses and Elijah. They've seen something that no one else has seen. The point is, apart with Jesus, you'll see what you've never seen before. Apart with Jesus, you'll see things that you cannot see anywhere else. I believe a lot of God's people would see a lot of glorious truths if they spent more time apart with Jesus Christ. You'll see things that you will not see anywhere else. There are things you will only see apart with Jesus. That leads to Peter's response in verse 4 of Matthew 17. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. And his plan was, Lord, we're just going to stay here. We'll build 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and we're just going to stay here. It's a good place to be. And it is good. It is good to be apart with Jesus, beholding his glory. And it needs to be an everyday occurrence. But we can't stay there. You can't stay there. It's a place you ought to visit every day. But know this, you can't stay there. It prepares us for our day. They felt and experienced an overshadowing presence. Notice verse 4 of Matthew 17. Or verse 5. While he yet spake, that is, while Peter yet spake, behold, a bright cloud. Now think about that. A bright cloud. Clouds aren't usually bright. A bright cloud. This is something extraordinary. A bright cloud overshadowed. That is, it concealed and enveloped them. Apart with Jesus, they experienced a very special covering. A covering of his presence. Every day, we need to get apart with Jesus, and we need to feel his overshadowing presence. We ought not want to go out there until we feel his overshadowing presence. So now you have this bright cloud overshadowing them, and then from within that cloud came a voice. Notice what it says, verse 5. And behold. The very word behold indicates something extraordinary, something magnificent. You'll behold a lot of things apart with Jesus. Again, that you cannot behold anywhere else. And behold, a voice out of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. Apart with Jesus, the Lord gets their attention. And behold, a voice spake unto them. He has their attention. Their attention is not unto things below. Their full attention is upon what is transpiring right before them. They have no idea what's going on below. They don't need to know what's going on below. But the Lord has their attention. And they heard God speak. And notice the effect that this had upon them, verse 6. And when the disciples, Peter, James, and John, heard it, that is the voice, they fell on their face, and they were sore afraid. Every day, we need to get apart with Jesus, and we need to hear His voice, but not just hear His voice, they heard the power of His voice in such a way that it brought them to a place of humble submission. That's what prepares us for out there, is being apart with Jesus, seeing Jesus in His glory, hearing God, God getting our full attention. Then notice verse 7. And in addition to this, so several things are happening. And Jesus came. What does that mean? And Jesus came. Well, does it not mean that He drew closer to them? He's already in the mountain. And Jesus came. So Jesus draws near to them. We need to draw as near as we can to Christ. But what a blessing it is when Christ draws near to us. Jesus came. How close did He get? Well, it goes on to say, and touched them. He got close enough to touch them. So they experienced the nearness of Christ, even a greater nearness. There was a nearness when they went up into the mountain with Jesus, but now there's even a greater nearness. We need to experience that every day. We need to begin our day that way. We ought to get up in the morning and feel the nearness of the Lord. And then we ought to get apart with the Lord and we feel even a greater nearness of the Lord. And then they felt the touch of the Lord. And as He touched them, notice what it says here. And Jesus came, verse 7, and Jesus came and touched them and said, I believe with His hand upon them, Arise, be not afraid. So, Jesus, apart with Jesus, they were now the recipients, and they felt His arousing, transforming touch. You cannot be touched by Christ and not know it. If He touches you, you're going to know it. You're going to feel something. And He touched them, and as He touched them, He spoke, Arise, be not afraid. Then notice verse 8. And when they had lifted up their eyes. So now they lift up their eyes and notice what they saw. They saw no man, referring to Moses and Elijah, save Jesus only. Now all they see is Jesus Christ. That's what you need to see every day. That's how you need to begin your day. They looked up in response to His touch. They looked up in response to His voice. And they saw Jesus only. They didn't see Moses, the representative of the law. They didn't see Elijah, the representative of the prophets. They saw Jesus only. And I believe they now see Jesus clothed again in His humanity. They see the one who came to fulfill the law and the prophets. In other words, they see Him as more than all. They see Him as above all. He's more than Moses. He's more than Elijah. He's above Moses. He's above Elijah. They no longer see Moses and Elijah. They see Jesus only. And that's how we need to go out there. That's how we begin our day. So they're brought to the realization that Jesus is all. So again, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, bringeth them up into a high mountain apart. And it was there that they spent some time with Jesus Christ. We have to spend time with Jesus Christ. You will not live the Christian life apart from spending time with Jesus Christ. And it is time apart with Jesus Christ. I believe that every day there has to be a special place. That closet space where you shut the door. That means you don't bring your cell phone into this place. Well, what if someone calls? They'll call back. Don't you worry about it. If you have to bring your cell phone in, you're not apart with Jesus. There aren't many of God's people today that get apart with Jesus. Because we live in a day of connectivity. And we live in a day when God's people are scared to death they're going to miss something going on out there. But I'm telling you, you will not live the Christian life without getting apart with Jesus. And apart with Jesus, Jesus was revealed to them. And they were awakened. And they saw and they felt and experienced His powerful presence. And they heard the voice of God. And they experienced His reassuring touch. And were brought to see Jesus only. Now, they're ready to face the day. And you will be too. When all of that happens, you are now ready to face the day. You can't just roll out of bed, get your clothes on, and go out there and be ready to face the day. Doesn't work that way. You have to spend time apart with Jesus. And we cannot overestimate time apart with Jesus. That leads us to what we read in verse 9. As they came down from the mountain. Remember, Peter said, Lord, it's good for us to be here on the mountaintop. But again, we must realize that it's needful to go down. It's needful to go down from the mountaintop into the valley of service. It's needful. That's what we're here for. So they went up into the mountain together with Jesus, and they did not come down alone either. Don't go out there alone. You'll be swallowed up. You won't survive. You will not live the Christian life. Again, notice verse 9. As they came down from the mountain. And it's obvious that Jesus is included in the day from the very next words. As they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying. So Jesus is included in the day. And He's talking with them as they come down the mountain. Jesus, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Our shepherd, our friend, our companion, and them. That's the way to go out there. That's the way to face a day. So they come down from the mountain. He doesn't send them down the mountain. He comes down with them. And it's not that God is just sending us out there. He'll go with us. Big difference. God doesn't send me out there by myself. Now, I may go out there by myself. And if I do, I rob myself. But if I have spent time apart with Jesus, I go with Him. And it'll make a difference. It'll make a difference in your day. So, He doesn't merely send us down the mountain. He comes down the mountain with us. John 14:31, we hear Jesus say to the 11 at that time, "Arise, let us go hence." And they left that upper room. But it is, "Arise, let us go." It's not, "Arise, you go," but, "Arise, let us go hence." They didn't know where they were going. You don't have to know where you're going. You just have to go with Him. And it won't matter where you're going. So, they came down from the mountain. Just as Jesus, remember, taketh, bringeth, and leadeth them up into the mountain, so He taketh, bringeth, and leadeth them down the mountain. That's how we're to enter a day. Not alone, but with Him. That's how we face a day. And then if you come down to verse 14, "And when they were come," they, not just Peter, James, and John, but Christ, were come to the multitude. And we see they're now right in the middle of everyday life, and there's a problem. The multitudes have surrounded the apostles, and they want to know why they could not heal this demon-possessed son. So they come down, and right away they are faced with an everyday situation. But because they were apart with Jesus, they had something to hold on to. He always will. Apart with Jesus will give you something to hold on to. And not only that, something has gotten a hold of them. So we can take our apart with Jesus time into everyday life. Apart with Jesus is the revelation of Christ. And we can take that revelation, that unveiling of Christ, into our everyday life. We can take what we learn in our part time with Jesus into everyday life. It is our part time that renews us. It's our part time that awakens us and stirs us and incites us and invigorates us and enables us to face the trials, the distresses and the difficulties, and all the obstacles and all the battles and all the struggles and all the burdens and all the sorrows and all the heartaches. And you can face them. Since you've spent time apart with Jesus, you can now face these with strength, assurance, and confidence. But you have to spend a part time with Jesus. So, oh, that this would be our life. Apart with Jesus, and then coming down with Jesus into everyday life. It is apart with Jesus that results in with Jesus in everyday life. And it's these two together that enables us to handle life. Most people cannot handle life. Most people cannot handle things that they weren't planning on. But I'm telling you, you can if you spend the part time with Jesus and go with Him. you'll be able to handle what others cannot handle. Throughout my ministry, I have witnessed those who profess to know the Lord, and they can't handle anything. They can't handle anything. Any inconvenience, they fall completely to pieces. Somebody has to hold their hand. Why is that? Because they don't spend the part-time with Jesus. That's why it is. Because I'm telling you, you spend the part-time with Jesus, you'll be able to handle life. You'll be able to handle it because you'll go out there with Him, and it's not you handling, it's Him handling it. And what a difference that'll make. Mary Ben, if you'll come and lead us verse song. Let's all stand. Ben will lead us in singing.